my specific role and why I'm here today is that I coordinate 2 housing grants from HUD that come to us through the Community Partnership for the Prevention of Homelessness here in the city. And those 2 programs serve veterans with mental illness, and in some cases their families. I'm grateful to be able to be here today and talk about those programs that are supporting veterans who found themselves homeless, but with support are changing their lives and the lives of their families. I don't want to be overly dramatic in my statement, but the bottom line is that as I see it, the Veterans Program that I administer saves the lives of veterans. Just no question of that in my mind. Life on the street or in shelters is hard. Homeless people, especially those who have mental illness, live shorter lives, some dramatically shorter due to weather, substance abuse, muggings, poor health care and nutrition, and a host of other causes. Housing veterans who've been homeless, some for decades, will allow them to live longer and better lives. When people are housed in their own apartments with a range of case management services, they're enabled to become much more self-sufficient. Rather than solely focus on day-to-day survival, with stable housing, they can think about it and plan for employment, families, leisure activities, volunteerism, and a whole range of life plans that the rest of us in this room primarily take for granted. Veteran Connections Housing Subsidy Program, funded through HUD, meets that need, currently through 28 veterans with mental illness, and for 7 of them, their families in 1 to 3 bedroom apartments here in the city. Those 28 include 18 men and 10 women, along with 13 children, including another 2 twin boys who are on the way and due in March. Also, with another subsidy program coming online from HUD called Family Connections that began on December 1st, we'll add another 20 to 25 veterans and their families in 2 to 4 bedroom apartments, also scattered site, also here in the city. Veteran Connections is a grant that was specifically created to respond to the President's call to end veteran homelessness by 2015, a goal that it's well on its way to being reached through programs like this, through HUD-VASH, and through just standard Section 8 vouchers as well. Failure to maintain these 2 grants will mean that the 50 to 55 veterans and their families will no longer be served in the way that they have been. They'll be in a position to having move out of their apartments, return to living sofa to sofa, shelter to shelter, or in some cases with a couple of men that I've served underneath the bridges over by the Kennedy Center and the Watergate. I know you're familiar with that spot where Route 66 crosses over the river. It's a very heavily used area for veterans who refuse to live in shelters because the shelters are too dangerous. I urge you to do what you can to ensure that this funding continues, and keep in mind stories of 3 veterans whom we serve. Ms. Curley, who's here today and will tell her own story, but 2 others that I'll talk about briefly. Gentleman, Mr. R, is a Gulf War vet suffering from PTSD and schizophrenia, who was in and out of jail and men's shelters for years following his service. Has been living on in his own apartment for over a year. He's recently refurnished his apartment. We get furniture from a place called A Wider Circle out in Silver Spring. It's free for the veterans. We pay through the grant to have it transported from that spot in Silver Spring to the person's apartment. But he wanted his own furniture that was new that he paid for. So he refurnished it through a layaway that he arranged and paid for, and he's now studying to become a CPA, beginning with online math refresher courses. A third veteran, in addition to Ms. Curley and Mr. R, is Ms. M, who was living in a DC family shelter with her young son and daughter. They are respectively 6 and 8 years old. After serving stateside during the recent Iraq conflict, she's been a leaseholder since March of 2011 with financial support from Veteran Connections and the HUD subsidy. After being court involved with charges ranging from disorderly conduct to prostitution, she's now working a full-time retail position and is readying herself to take a phlebotomy licensing exam after successfully completing a certification course. Now, those things wouldn't be possible if those 2 folks were living in a shelter on the street. They wouldn't have the stable lives and the stable base of operations that they need, particularly the young woman with her children, in order to sort of pursue those things. So these are the faces of veterans served by HUD financial support that does not filter through the VA. Our program isn't touched by the VA. It doesn't come through HUD-VASH. It's from HUD. It comes through the community partnership We serve several veterans who have dishonorable discharges who also would not be served through the VA programs. It comes through smaller grant programs. If the funding of Veteran and Family Connections is not continued, these 3 families and nearly 50 more will find themselves again homeless and without HUD support. Good.
So, Chairman Mayor was urging the administration to talk about sequestration and how it wouldn't affect veterans, and we lost it for a while, and he thought he got an agreement, but is VA really exempt fully from sequestration?
Yeah, VA is. And there are some sort of gray areas like the HUD VASH program, the Veteran Supportive Housing Program, where the rental subsidy comes from HUD, and then some services are funded by VA. With respect to that program, OMB has made the judgment that the HUD VASH program will also be exempted. But there's a wide range of other programs, like the Homeless Assistance Grants Program, like the Major Rental Assistance Programs, that serve lots of veterans, but they're not, veterans-only programs, and they're clearly not exempted.
And I think another point would be, say, that if sequestration isn't in effect, then of course veterans cuts would be back on the table as part of a grander budget deal. So let's just not forget that aspect.
Right.
Yes, sir.
My question is for Michael. What type of liaison program do you have between your organization and the Department of Veterans Affairs?
We don't have a formal liaison program, but I myself and my colleague, who's the co-director, have regular phone conversations and in-person conversations with Ilana Marmon at Franklin Street, and we sort of have a regular ear with Kevin Morton, who's in charge of the homeless program. So lots of interactions, even as there's nothing formal.
Making sure that your clients get all the benefits.
Absolutely, yeah.
I have a question for Doug. Doug, the APRC program is coming out of the Department of Labor, and that program has always been underfunded. So you just said that program would take another deeper cut than it already is?
Well, under
sequestration.
Right, and so that's another program that would be subject to sequestration, and it's currently funded at what, $39 million, and so 8% of that is $3 or $4 million for January, and like all these other programs, it would face pressure over the next decade under the Budget Control Act spending caps as well as under whatever additional funding reductions that could be agreed to as part of the broader budget deal that's coming down the pike. I mean, an important point here is that while under sequestration, as Jonathan said earlier, the administration really has no discretion about how to distribute these cuts. They're just on an across-the-board basis starting in January. So every non-exempt program gets cut by a certain percentage. And for the discretionary, non-defense discretionary programs, that percentage is about 8%. Under the Budget Control Act, the spending caps that are in place for future years, the administration and Congress would have the ability to set priorities, to move money around, to fund some things rather than others. And, I have to say, when it comes to VA medical care, for example, there's no doubt that Congress would make every effort to fully fund VA medical care, but it would be able to do that only by making even deeper reductions in other non-defense discretionary programs, like the HUD rental assistance programs, for example.
If I could just add one more thing about the question that you asked. My program, the program I administer, as well as HUD-VASH, comes with supportive services. So there's a case manager assigned to each person who's in the program, and I know I personally provide a range of services from very little to at least once a week services for people, connecting them with other organizations and support that they need. So.
Go ahead.
Similar to the HUD program, do you have any ideas around how many veteran families are being served by HHS?
Yeah, and I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, unfortunately. That's a very good question, you guys. The numbers I got, the GAO did a study that they released back in 2007 where they matched up administrative data, HUD and VA, and were able to estimate. Unfortunately, this is true at HUD. I don't know if it's true at HHS. HUD does not require agencies to report veteran status for recipients of rental assistance, so they don't collect the data at all. I don't know if that's true at HHS or not. If it isn't true, then it may be that those data are at hand, but I just don't know.
So where did you get the 6%?
Well, like I said, so GAO did this study, and what they did is they took the administrative data from HUD. They basically matched up names and Social Security numbers between the HUD and the VA data sets, and were able to do some estimates about how many folks are receiving HUD rental assistance. We've done an analysis based on census data, which asked people about whether they ever served in active military duty, and also asked them about whether they received housing assistance of any kind. And we've come up with about 6% as the conclusion there too. So that's how we did that.
Well, we're just about out of time. So is there any more questions? Still have a few minutes left. Okay, if not, I want to just thank everyone for being here. This is very important stuff. As you know, we're coming up on the so-called fiscal cliff. I'm sure everyone's probably tired of hearing about it by now, but hopefully we'll be able to come up with a deal that's not going to balance the budget on the backs of the vulnerable. Remember to tell your legislators that if they care about veterans issues and ending veterans homelessness, they should continue to robustly fund the full spectrum of discretionary programs that help our nation heroes. That includes HUD-funded programs, Department of Labor programs, and others. So thanks also to the panel for being here, guys. I know everyone's busy and it's hard. And thanks also to the Veterans Affairs Committee for hosting us here. And everyone have a safe and happy holidays. Thank you.